Imagine this. At the absolute peak of one of the deadliest rivalries in music history, two of its biggest enemies show up together on a family sitcom. This wasn't just some strange, random TV moment. It was a bold attempt at peace, broadcast for the entire world to see. But how did it even happen, and what did it really mean? The story of Snoop Dogg and Sean Puffy Combs on the Steve Harvey Show is one of the most surreal and significant chapters in hip-hop history. It was a public plea for unity at a time when the culture was being ripped apart by paranoia and violence. To really get the weight of this moment, you first have to understand the war that was tearing hip-hop apart. Section 1. The War. The mid-1990s were a dark time for hip-hop. What started as musical competition and regional pride had spiraled into a full-blown conflict. The infamous East Coast versus West Coast rivalry. The feud's main players were two of the biggest labels in the game. In New York, you had Bad Boy Records, led by Sean Puffy Combs and his superstar, the Notorious B.I.G., and out in Los Angeles, you had Death Row Records, home to Snoop Dogg and run by the intimidating Suge Knight, with the fiery Tupac Shakur as its figurehead. This wasn't just about trading insults on a track. The rivalry was a toxic cocktail of diss tracks, public confrontations, and a media frenzy that turned every small slight into a declaration of war. It kicked into high gear at the 1995 Source Awards in New York, when Suge Knight took a shot at Puffy right on stage, making the whole atmosphere hostile. It was at that same show that Snoop Dogg famously asked the New York crowd, "The East Coast ain't got no love for Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and Death Row?" He was met with a chorus of boos. Soon the conflict went from words to violence. In 1994, Tupac Shakur was shot at Quad Studios in New York. He publicly blamed associates of Bad Boy Records, though they always denied being involved. The tension just kept climbing, creating a climate of fear that forced fans and artists to pick a side. The consequences of that choice felt like they could be deadly. Then, the unthinkable happened. On September 7th, 1996, Tupac was gunned down in Las Vegas, dying 6 days later. His murder sent a shockwave through the industry and left a massive void. The rivalry had hit its tragic peak, leaving the hip-hop world grieving and terrified, wondering what could possibly happen next. In the months that followed, the tension didn't go away, it festered. This beef wasn't entertainment anymore, it was a crisis threatening the very soul of the culture. Someone had to step up and try to stop the bleeding. Section 2, the Sitcom Peace Summit. Just 5 months after Tupac's death in February 1997, something truly bizarre happened. On an episode of the WB sitcom The Steve Harvey Show, the two men from the center of the opposing camps, Snoop Dogg from Death Row and Puff Daddy from Bad Boy, appeared together. This wasn't a subtle hint. It was a full-on guest appearance on national television. The episode, titled I Do, I Don't, had a plot that mirrored the real-life drama. Steve Harvey's character, a former funk musician, is approached by both Snoop and Puffy, who each want to sample one of his old hits. Steve's friend Cedric warns him about the dangerous East Coast-West Coast rivalry, but Steve just sees an opportunity. He brings both rappers into his classroom to broker a peace deal. He looks them in the eye and says, "Whether you like it or not, you're role models," telling them their influence on kids was too important to waste on a fight. What happens next is the heart of this incredible moment. Puff Daddy speaks first, saying, "Yo, Steve, check this, man. All that East Coast, West Coast stuff is a bunch of media hype. This has been my dog from day one. It's all good between me and him." Snoop Dogg jumps in, adding, "We ain't come here to talk about nothing behind us. We come to talk about what's ahead of us. We here to make a difference. Knowledge is power, y'all. You know, we're the future, so it's on us to make a change." And just like that, in front of a live studio audience and millions watching at home, the two figureheads of the rival factions declared peace. Section 3, the symbolism and the strategy. This was no random cameo, it was a brilliant and calculated media strategy. Before they even taped the episode, a press conference was held where Snoop and Puffy publicly called for a truce. Combs stated, "The media need to let it go, and the fans need to let it go," while Snoop added, "I don't want to talk about yesterday. I want to talk about tomorrow. We've got to come together, shake hands, call for peace, and move forward." The man who orchestrated it all was Steve Harvey. He had met with both rappers separately and suggested they use his sitcom as a neutral platform to clear the air of an overblown controversy. Choosing a family-friendly sitcom was a stroke of genius. It ripped the message of peace out of the hip-hop media bubble and delivered it straight to mainstream America. It humanized Snoop and Puffy, showing them not as gangsters at war, but as leaders calling for unity. For Snoop, this was an especially risky move. He announced at the press conference that he was speaking on behalf of me and Death Row Records, a bold statement to make while the label's CEO, Suge Knight, was in jail. It was a clear sign that the artists themselves were tired of the negativity. Puffy, for his part, said he was embarrassed to be associated with something as ignorant as a coastal beef. By standing together, they were challenging the entire narrative. They were telling the world that this so-called war was a media creation that had spun out of control with tragic consequences. The artists themselves didn't want this fight. Section 4. The aftermath and the unfinished piece. The sitcom Cameo was a landmark moment, a public announcement that the war was over. But tragically, the peace it called for couldn't hold. Less than a month after the episode aired on March 9th, 1997, the notorious B.I.G. was shot and killed in Los Angeles. The world was stunned. The second pillar of the rivalry had fallen, and the hope from that sitcom appearance felt like it had been shattered. Biggie's death proved just how deep the divisions ran, and that a single TV show, no matter how symbolic, couldn't heal years of bad blood overnight. And yet, the Cameo's impact lasted. In the wake of Biggie's murder, the call for unity grew even louder. Community leaders like Louis Farrakhan organized peace summits to formalize the truce that Snoop and Puffy had started. That moment on The Steve Harvey Show became a foundation for the healing process. It was the first, very public step taken by the artists at the center of the storm to say, enough is enough. Years later, Steve Harvey asked Snoop why he agreed to do the show during such a dangerous time. Snoop replied, "Because I wanted to show that I really had love for Puffy and he had love for me. They made it like it was more than what it actually was. We actually loved each other, and this was an opportunity for us to come on your show and do something together, and it showed the whole world that we actually loved each other." In an era where media so often fuels conflict, this was a rare moment where it was used to push for peace. How important do you think this appearance was in reshaping the narrative of the East Coast-West Coast rivalry and influencing hip-hop for years to come? Let us know what you think in the comments. The story of Snoop and Puffy's sitcom Cameo is so much more than a weird piece of pop culture trivia. It's a powerful lesson in courage and using your platform to stand for peace in the middle of a war. At a time when hip-hop was being defined by division, two of its biggest stars used one of the most unlikely stages imaginable to broadcast a message of unity, friendship, and responsibility. And though tragedy would strike again just weeks later, their joint appearance planted a seed of reconciliation that would eventually grow, helping to close the deadliest chapter in hip-hop's history. It remains a bizarre yet profoundly important moment when music's biggest enemies chose a sitcom classroom to try and teach the world a lesson about peace.